This is the BBC.
This podcast is supported by advertising outside the UK.
Hello and welcome to the front row Portakabin at the heart of the Edinburgh Fringe. Our guests tonight include George R.R. Martin, the creator of Game of Thrones, former Python and film director Terry Gilliam, paying tribute to Robin Williams, and Alison Jackson on an opera performed by celebrity lookalikes, including a Nigella singing O Solo Mio whilst licking a cornetto. It is a work in progress and she's still casting.
Do you know anyone who looks like Farage?
I don't, no.
David Cameron? Boris is easy because he's just a hairstyle.
I'll take her word for that. More on the operatic version of Heat magazine in a moment. We start with an author here at the Edinburgh Festival who is now such a phenomenon that he cannot walk more than a few yards along the street without getting mobbed by adoring fans. George R.R. Martin wrote the epic historical fantasy series on which the TV show Game of Thrones is based. It's been a huge hit here and in the United States with up to 20 million viewers per episode. Set in an imaginary historical past, Game of Thrones features Machiavellian courtiers and warring families plotting to seize the Iron Throne from the ruling Lannister dynasty.
Father, I'm guilty. Is that what you want to hear? I'm guilty of being a dwarf. I've been on trial for that my entire life.
I wish I was the monster you think I am. I wish I had enough poison for the whole pack of you. I would gladly give my life to watch you all swallow it.
Peter Dinklage as Tyrion Lannister in Game of Thrones. George R.R. Martin has written 5 volumes of his book series so far and sold over 15 million copies worldwide. He's promised fans 2 more volumes, but can't or won't say when they'll be finished. When I caught up with him this morning, he explained the parallels between England's War of the Roses and his own stories.
Well, there are obvious ways. I mean, Lancaster and York, Lannister and Stark. There are certain resonances there. You can look at a figure like Robert Baratheon and clearly see the influence of Edward IV there, but it's not a one-to-one thing. I mean, I borrowed from Edward IV for that character, and I borrowed a little from Falstaff and, various other characters over the years, and partly it's entirely a creation. So history inspires me, but I don't just file off the names and substitute fantasy names and pass it off as fiction.
And since we're in Scotland, I believe you've taken some references from medieval Scottish history as well.
Scottish history is amazingly bloody and dark and twisted and full of betrayals and battles and yes, so it's been a great source of inspiration for me over the years. The Red Wedding, which is perhaps the most infamous scene in my books and in the TV show, was inspired in large part by 2 events in Scottish history. The Black Dinner, which took place right here in Edinburgh, when the Earl of Douglas and his brother were murdered at a dinner given by the king, and the Glencoe Massacre, when the Campbells slaughtered the MacDonalds. So I combined the 2 of those and threw in a wedding, and you got the Red Wedding.
There is a great wall of ice in the series that lies beyond the 7 kingdoms, and beyond that wall is a frozen land inhabited by some pretty scary characters. I think you've said that a visit to Hadrian's Wall in the early 80s was quite inspirational for you.
Yes, 1981, for my first visit to the UK. We got there right at the sunset. All of the other tourists were leaving just as we arrived, and we almost had the wall to ourselves. And we walked up there, and I just stood there looking out and trying to put my mind in the mind of a Roman legionary in the days when the wall was still being manned by Imperial Rome, and maybe a man from Italy or from Carthage or North Africa or Greece, and now he's been sent to what he would have regarded as the end of the world, and having no idea what was in those forests to the north. It was a kind of profound feeling, and it stayed with me. And it wasn't until a decade later that I started writing A Song of Ice and Fire, the first book, Game of Thrones, and I said, I want to use that, so I'll have my own wall. But of course, it's a fantasy, so my wall is 700 feet high, made of ice and magic, and 300 miles long. So I upped the stakes a little, turned it up to 11.
You started writing Game of Thrones in 1991, as you said. There are now 5 volumes of A Song of Ice and Fire, and you're planning to write another 2. When you started, did you ever imagine it would become quite so epic? And how do you keep track of all the characters? Because there are hundreds of them now, aren't there?
I keep track of them as best I can. I have files on my computer. I have, family trees and lists of kings and the dates of their reigns and a few other things. But most of it is really in my head. I think I have a trick memory. I use the brain synapses that normal people use for, like, real people. I use for these made-up characters. So as to the success of the series, no, I never dreamed it would be what it's become. So much part of the culture and the zeitgeist. It's astonishing and a little scary sometimes. The
TV series, of course, has been immensely popular as well,
yes.
and that's now caught up with the published books.
Not quite, but
it's. Are you under pressure from the TV writers to get out the next volume, or do you give them manuscripts before they're published?
Well, I do give them manuscripts before it's published, and I've had the meetings and discussions with them. I don't think I'm particularly under pressure from them. I'm just under pressure from everybody. I mean,
from all the
HBO wants it, and my publishers want it, and my editors want it, and my fans and readers want it, and I want it. I want it most of everything.
You have been criticised for some of the more violent scenes and plot lines, and in particular high levels of sexual violence, particularly in the TV series. How do you respond to that?
Well, I'm writing what's in essence is a war story. And if you're writing about war, I think there is a moral obligation to talk about it honestly as you perceive it, and honestly as is reflected in the history. And the truth is that sexual violence has been part of war since the Stone Age. It's not pleasant, but I think we do a disservice when we write war stories and leave that out and just show the brave men fighting battles. I mean, if you just want the kind of Disneyland Middle Ages where you have castles and beautiful princesses and, knights in shining armor, but no one gets killed and no one gets raped and the good guys win and everybody lives happily ever after, that's fine for Disneyland, and that's fine. When I was 8 years old, I loved that kind of story too. But I'm not 8 years old anymore, and most of my readers aren't either. Wouldn't want an 8-year-old reading my books. So I think you have to take a more adult, nuanced, and honest approach to what the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages or the Fantasy Ages were really all about.
You were a Hollywood screenplay writer for many years. Did you ever consider this series being made into movies rather than an HBO series?
No, I turned down several inquiries. When the book started hitting the bestseller lists, a lot of Hollywood studios were looking for big fantasies to have their own Lord of the Rings, and I got approached numerous times, but I just didn't see, my books are bigger than Tolkien's. Storm of Swords is longer than the entirety of Lord of the Rings, and that's just one of 5 books that I have out so far with 2 more to go, so there was no way it could fit into a 2.5-hour movie. As it is with the HBO Heroes, we have 10 hours per season, so we've done, 40 hours so far. We're filming another 10, that'll be 50 hours. We'll have at least 70, 80, 90 hours by the time we're done, and we're still cutting massive amounts.
I mean, just finally, as you said, you're under a lot of pressure to finish this. Are you sort of fed up with it now? Will you be massively relieved when you're finished?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm fed up with it. I mean, I love the world and I love the characters, but will I be glad when I'm done? Yes, but that's true of every story I've ever written. People ask, do you like writing? I love having written. There's an enormous amount of satisfaction when you actually finish a story, or even more so when you finish a novel. There's always the insecurities. We writers are insecure creatures. So you would finish a novel, and there's the great period of relief and pride that you finished it, and then there's, wake up in the middle of the night, oh, God, is it really good enough? Oh, I don't know. Maybe I should go back and rewrite it one more time. Let me look at it again. Oh, that scene, I should really do something about that scene. And then the next day, no, it's right. I shouldn't doubt it, and you go back and forth. But eventually they publish it, and you can't go back and forth anymore, so...
Thanks to George R.R. Martin. And the first 5 volumes of A Song of Ice and Fire are out in paperback and ebook. Here at the Edinburgh Fringe, where there are literally hundreds of comedians gathered in the city centre, the news of Robin Williams' suicide has come as a real shock. Tributes have been pouring in all day for the Oscar-winning actor who started his career in stand-up before going on to make the TV show Mork and Mindy and a string of hit movies, including Good Morning Vietnam and The Dead Poets Society.
Nanu, Nanu.
There are penalties for being an illegal alien.
I resent that. Even though my father was an eyedropper, he married Mom.
Oh, I'll get you, my pretty. Oh, my God, it's the Wicked Witch of the North. It's Hanoi Hannah.
All these beer commercials usually show big men, manly men doing manly things. You've just killed a small animal. It's time for a light beer. Why not have a realistic beer commercial? What's the realistic thing about beer where you go, it's 5 o'clock in the morning. You've just pissed on a dumpster. It's Miller time.
But if you listen real close, you can hear them whisper their legacy to you.
Carpe diem. Seize the day, boys. Make your lives extraordinary.
Robin Williams also won an Oscar nomination for his role in Terry Gilliam's film The Fisher King, about a depressed radio shock jock who finds redemption by helping a homeless man.
As the king began to drink, he realized his wound was healed. He looked in his hands, and there was the Holy Grail, that which he sought all of his life. He turned to the fool and said with amazement, "How could you find that which my brightest and bravest could not?" The fool replied, "I don't know. I only knew that you were thirsty." It's very beautiful, isn't it?
Robin Williams and the former member of Monty Python became close friends after making The Adventures of Baron Munchausen. I spoke to Terry Gilliam a little earlier on the phone, and I asked what it was like directing Robin Williams in The Fisher King.
Oh, I think Fisher King, the character he played, Perry, is probably the closest to Robin himself in life, from being incredibly funny to being tragically scarred on different levels. Personally, I think it's the best thing he's ever done. I think it's so emotional and so smart and touching at the same time.
Yes, because there are some very dark moments in Fisher King and themes of suicide and depression and alcoholism. At that time, though, he was mainly known as a comic actor. What made you think of him for the role?
Well, I mean, any great comic is probably as tragic as he is funny. It seems to be part of the gift from the gods. And we'd become good friends after Munchausen, and I just loved him. And he was the reason the film got made. It was probably the reason I was hired to direct it. I was the bait to lure Robin on board. And what was interesting working on it, I was worried that Robin and myself together would just sort of spin off into outer space. And that's why I cast Jeff Bridges to ground the two of us.
How aware were you of his problems with depression?
Oh, well, yeah, I knew that. That was it. See, there's a thing that everybody at this point seems to be talking about, depression and mental illness. For me, it was the genius, and genius pays the price. It's always the way it is. You can't have one without the other. I really do feel that. And yes, Robin would get very depressed, but at the same time, he was so aware of other people's depressions or low moments. There was a point when we were shooting, it was in the middle of the night, about 4 a.m, at this Chinese restaurant, and everything was going very badly. Everybody was so tired. And Robin, in the midst of all this, suddenly did about a 45-minute performance that was just breathtaking. Not only was it exhilarating and lifting everybody's spirit, but almost everybody in the crew, he had a specific joke, an idea for each one of them. I mean, that kind of generosity was extraordinary, and it got us through the evening. So
it was like a little stand-up routine just done on the hoof.
Oh, totally. I mean, I've never met anybody in my life, of all the comedians and brilliant people I've met, nothing to compare with what Robin had. He was like a strange kind of receptor, an antenna that seemed to suck in everything that was in the world, every bit of knowledge, every idea, and he could then transform these things into these brilliant moments.
Was he always performing, even when he was off duty?
No, he'd get really low and depressed. He could be there'd be times just like we're dealing with a child, he was just so lost in whatever was bothering him. But it was, a lot of people get like that and they sort of take it out on the people around them, and that's not Robin. He would really just go off and kind of deal with it on his own, and obviously, not always perfectly, let's put it that way.
What's your favourite memory of him?
Oh, I don't know. There's too many. There was one particular night when we were doing Baron Munchausen, and he and I were sitting in a bar somewhere in Rome, and he just became this other character. He started talking, and it was one of the funniest evenings I've ever spent, just the two of us. He'd become this serial killer, basically. Robin was very, very deep. It was a really deep, rich well that you could descend with him into and be astonished. And the problem is, when he did it on his own, it was probably very painful. It must have been horrible. I only wish that he had managed to get to the Python show, but I think he was having problems at the time and couldn't. I think it would have been a great way to say goodbye.
Terry Gilliam remembering the late Robin Williams. You're listening to Front Row with me, Kirsty Lang, from the Edinburgh Festival. And joining me now in the BBC Portakabin is the critic and comedian Viz Groskop, who's been up here doing a stand-up show on the Free Fringe. But we've asked her to review a film for us, The Congress, starring the American actress Robin Wright, who's been enjoying something of a career renaissance lately as a Lady Macbeth in the Netflix series House of Cards. Wright plays a version of herself in this film, which is directed by Ari Folman, who made Waltz with Bashir. The Congress is based on a sci-fi novel, and it transitions into animation halfway through. It starts with Robin Wright getting an offer from a major studio to sell her cinematic identity for a large sum of money on condition she never works again. She'll be scanned and sampled so the studio can use her digitalised image forever after, and she will never get older.
We at Marymount want to scan you. All of you, your body, your face, your emotions, your laughter, your tears, your climaxing, your happiness, your depressions, your fears, longings. We want to sample you. We want to preserve you, and we want to own this thing called Robin Wright.
And what will you do with this thing that you call Robin Wright?
We'll do all the things that your Robin Wright wouldn't do.
Robin Wright and Danny Houston in The Congress. Viv Groskop, this is a sort of modern-day version of Faust, isn't it?
Yes, she's asked to make this pact with this fictional studio, very cheekily called Marymount. And I did love the beginning of this and the premise of it. There's this bit where, as you can tell from that clip, she says, "The last contract, I'm not even 45. In real life, she's 48. And so it has this fantastic premise of this idea that we're always talking about is what happens to older actresses when they get older. And she's had this amazing renaissance in House of Cards. I came to this as a fan of Princess Bride and her role in that. And all of this comes up in the beginning of the film. So you have this being John Malkovich feel in the beginning. It's so promising. And then it just descends into this mess of animation. I feel Robin Wright comes out of this quite well, but she's hardly in it at all.
It's quite a brave role for her to take on in some ways.
I think it is. It's brave because it's sending her up, but it's even more brave because it's such an experimental film, and I just don't feel it works. The narrative is very unclear.
Yes, I mean, this is a sort of dystopian version of a future Hollywood where real actors won't be needed and so on, and my guess is that technology already exists. So it is, as you say, a good idea. But once it became animated, I didn't really understand what was going on.
Yeah, it's very much presented as a hallucination, and I think you need to have taken more drugs than I have done, which is none, by the way, to understand what's going on. I'm sure that for animation fans, it has its merits because it's sort of very beautiful, and they obviously had a lot of fun with some quite self-indulgent in-jokes showing Jesus as an animation and all these people wandering in this crazy second world that she goes into when she's cryogenically frozen. But for anyone who isn't obsessed with anime, it's really difficult to follow, and I just didn't get it at all. And I couldn't wait for it to go back to the real world that she was wanting to escape from. And it seems to be a very good advert for why we do need actors.
I know it's a real pity, actually, for fans of, like myself, of Ari Folman's last film, Waltz with Bashir, which was a sort of documentary animation based on his own experiences fighting in the Israeli-Lebanese war. But I mean, this is much, much more surreal, isn't it? It's almost shades of sort of 1960s Yellow Submarine LSD trip type style.
Yeah, unfortunately, Yellow Submarine was probably only a few minutes long, and I think this is about all I could have taken of this. For me, the worst thing about this film was seeing John Hamm's name come up in the credits, who I love, and thinking, whoa, where was he? I didn't even see him. he just is a voice in it.
Thank you, Viv Groskop. And the Congress is out on Friday, Certificate 15, and you can see Viv's stand-up show, I Laughed, I Cried, at Cowgate Head in Edinburgh until the end of this week. Also coming to the Edinburgh Fringe with a new show later this month is Alison Jackson. She's an artist, photographer and filmmaker, best known for finding celebrity lookalikes and then getting them to pose in compromising situations. So, for instance, she'll put Prince William and a Kate lookalike naked in a bubble bath and photograph them. Jackson's lookalike scenarios have appeared in newspapers, magazines and a BAFTA-winning TV series called Double Take. She's now taking it a stage further with an opera called La Traciata, which will premiere in Edinburgh. Alison Jackson has described the show as an operatic celebrity magazine. I asked her why, having worked in photography and video and TV, she decided to make the move to live performance and opera.
I've always wanted to do an opera. It's actually quite the opposite of what I normally do in a photograph or a film, because I'm always trying to do complete, convincing realism. So with opera, it's high theatre, it's high drama, it's very much the opposite. But I do love it because I think there's such a dramatic thing around celebrity. So I've always wanted to do an opera.
Now, from watching some of the rehearsals, I gathered that you are using well-known operatic tunes, but you've rewritten the librettos, haven't you?
Yes, most of them are rewritten to famous opera arias. So we're using Carmen, Solo Mio, Libbiano, La Traviata. Most of them are rewritten to suit the particular lookalike. This is the set of the Nigella.
And her kitchen.
Her kitchen. We've reworded Nessun Dorma to her cooking and enjoying herself over pre-prepared foods and things like that. I really want to do this. It's Three Little Maids at School, and we've got Farage, Cameron and Boris, but we can't find a Farage lookalike and we can't find a Cameron lookalike. My Cameron lookalike, who's a spit image, has gone on holiday, so I'm very upset.
So inconsiderate of him.
Very inconsiderate.
And he was quite difficult to find.
Yeah, very. But I thought the three politicians fanning themselves with the sun singing Three Little Maids at School would have been absolutely perfect. Do you know anyone who looks like Farage?
I don't, no.
David Cameron. Boris is easy because he's just a hairstyle, isn't
yes.
it? Finding the lookalikes is, sort of multitask. So I use every agent. I have a casting director who's brilliant with likeness. People come through Facebook, and I go up to people in the street, run after people, sometimes mistake the real celebrity for a great lookalike, which is hugely embarrassing.
Has that happened to you?
Yes.
Who's that happened with?
Oh, lots of people. Tony Blair.
You actually went up to Tony Blair and said, the real Tony Blair?
Yeah, that's right, because there's three identical Tony Blairs running around London, believe it or not.
So what did the real Tony Blair say to you when you said you bear a striking resemblance if you thought about doing some lookalike work?
Just has that big grin. That's all he ever does, isn't it?
Oh dear, there's Gordon Ramsay in the background.
He's going to be hoarse by the end of the day.
He is.
What's this? What's it doing? Ah!
Well, Alison and I have now moved away from Gordon Ramsay in the background to a quieter space downstairs from the rehearsal room. Not all of your lookalikes can sing, can they?
Well, not really any of the lookalikes can sing. They are non-actors. They're not used to performing, they have day jobs, they do totally different things, and I'm asking them to do something, well, not just sing, but appear in front of an audience and perform at the same time. So I'm asking them to do something extremely difficult.
There's often a quite discomforting edge to some of your photographs, and I'm referring to pictures of members of the royal family on the loo, or Chris Evans being whipped in a gimp suit. I'd just seen a rehearsal of involving President Putin, and a reference to shooting down a plane. I mean, that's a bit close to the edge, isn't it?
Oh, I think it's very important. I mean, the plane has been shot down and everyone's pointing the finger, so it's something I can't ignore.
Because, a lot of your photographs do get you into trouble. I mean, right at the start of your career, your photographs of Diana and Dodie in their, imaginary mixed-race baby nearly got you thrown out of the Royal College of Art, didn't it?
Well, it did. I mean, that was a terrible time for me. And I wasn't allowed to show my work in any shows. So I was the only student unable to show my work. It's very upsetting.
You don't look very upset, though. Presumably you like provoking.
I think I just have that kind of ingredient. I'm very mischievous and, I'm just controversial. It's in my blood. I don't know.
I mean, are people likely to be upset by some elements of this show?
Well, I can't tell you that, but I don't think so. It's an opera. It's entertaining and it's amusing, and there are a few things in it that may upset people, but who knows?
Are your portrayals a minefield in terms of defamation? I mean, have any celebrities ever taken legal action against you, or complained, or asked you to remove photographs? I mean, and are there any who you would consider a no-go area as a result?
Well, I mean, everything I do is designed to be thought-provoking for the audience. It's not a dig at the celebrity. It's about how we're absorbed with the whole kind of media bubble. We think we know celebrities completely intimately, but we only know them through constructed stories through the media. So it's not about trying to annoy a celebrity. I'm not trying to ridicule a celebrity on purpose just to wind people up.
Have you had any feedback from the royal family? Because they're often a subject of your work, aren't they?
I think it's no comment. Kate and Pippa are going to be singing Delibes' Lack Me, which is the British Airways tune. I just quite like that association because they come from a British Airways background. I just like the idea of seeing their progression from sort of bucket class, premium economy, first class through to now sitting on thrones. We may have Carol serving.
Now, you started doing this work with the concept that the camera can and does lie and distort, that photography seduces us into thinking that we know these famous people when we don't. Is that more difficult to achieve on stage?
It's a different medium altogether. So opera's a different medium to photography and film. So I have to work it in a different way because you're going to see warts and all. You can't hide anything. There are no clever camera tricks. Obviously, in my films and photographs, I use every trick in the book to make it look absolutely realistic. It's extremely difficult and one of the hardest things, or the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, to try and make people who roughly resemble people into identikits. With the opera, I've only picked the top lookalikes, so everybody looks exactly like who they should do.
It's going to be a lot more difficult to trick a theatre audience into believing that you've got, Wills and Kate on stage in the bath, which is one of your photographs.
Well, they're very, very good lookalikes, and there's a lot of bubbles, and I think people will believe it.
Alison Jackson and her opera, A Story in the Public Domain, La Traciata, is at Summerhall in Edinburgh from August the 21st to the 24th. Tomorrow, John Wilson will be here catching up with Phil Jupitus as he sits sketching at the National Gallery of Scotland and finding out about the poetry collection given to newly qualified Scottish doctors. You can join him at 7:15.